Hello there, I am Man in Yellow and welcome to a video in which I want to talk a bit about the new phobies coming in the All Hallows Masquerade Solar. I just want to kind of go through them, give my first impressions, compare them with some other phobies and so on. This is recorded a bit before the update actually happens, because it will not be until October 1st and I have early access to it here. We are on like a test server or whatever you want to call it, which is also why I'm level 15 here, and I have all phobies in the game at level 1. But we're just going to go through each of these new phobies and talk about them. So first of all, we have Lenny. Lenny is a phobie that we already knew about because he's already in the game. He got in there a little bit early. When you are looking at a 2-key turret, of course you are already very happy because 2-key turrets are just very good, because you get to either bank a key for a 4-key, which can be very powerful, or you get to bring a 1-key with them on turn 1, which is something that a lot of players do very often. However, also when you are looking at a 2-key turret, you are of course going to compare it to Unicorn. Unicorn is one of the most premium, like low rarity phobies in the game. You see it pretty much everywhere, maybe even a little bit too much. And that's a good reason for that. It's because it's really good. So if we're gonna compare Lenny to Unicorn, we are getting 100 more health and trading 35 attack and the ability to lay traps. I would say the race is about equal-ish, so I'm not going to look too much on that, but 35 attack and the ability to lay traps for just 100 more health is not really a great trade. Overall, I would say that Unicorn is going to be stronger than Lenny in almost every case. However, that does not make Lenny bad at all, because Unicorn is incredibly powerful, and you are likely going to be bringing both of them a lot of the time, or at least some of the time. So what you could do is you could go either Lenny or Unicorn on turn 1 with a 1-key to have a good board. And then you will go for the other one on the second turn, and it will allow you to save 4 keys for the third turn you have. Which means you can either go for a powerful 4-key, or you can do like a full bank and then get a 7-key out, which is very good. So you could either play a playstyle where you are like contesting the board very heavily with both Unicorn and Lenny and a 1-key, which are all like good for fighting. Then maybe you follow up with an aggressive 4-key or just with a high stat 4-key, and suddenly it's very hard for the opponent to fight you. Or you could just have Unicorn and Lenny kind of carry your early game so that you can bank to a 7-key. For example, you could go for like Oopsie Baby after them. Then you have a strong front line from like those two phobies, Unicorn and Lenny, which are pretty tanky for their cost, and you have a Oopsie Baby sitting behind them, which can both power down enemies and does a lot of damage and is very annoying with the range. So that kind of playstyle is something you could do with it. So I definitely think Lenny is going to be pretty good. I just think it's always going to be the second choice to Unicorn pretty much, because Unicorn is just kind of a little bit too strong. So overall, I think this is going to be pretty used. I mean, we've already seen it in the game. It just takes a little bit before it gets levels and people start using it some more, I think. Next up, we have Mozzy. Mozzy, I don't really think is going to be that great. If we're going to compare it to some other phobies, we can compare it to Baby Snaky. Those are actually fairly similar, which seems weird, but they are both phobies that leech and deal a decent bunch of damage as melee phobies. So the difference between these two is, of course, the race is different, right? But also you are trading 400 health and 50 attack for essentially only 60% more life leech and flying. And the life leech is less because you have less attack, of course. So really it's more like 50% more life leech per hit and then flying. And you gotta ask yourself, is that worth it? And I don't think it is. Of course, this can also be cured, so it's not an undead, right? But like, is the ability to cure it, have a little bit of flying and 50% extra leech with 400 health on a small phobia like this? I don't really think it is. Maybe it can be in some niche scenarios or in some scenarios. But the problem here is we are comparing Mozzy with Baby Snaky. And Baby Snaky is not a great phobie, straight up. Like, maybe it is at very low ranks, but once you start facing higher ranked players that know what they're doing, Baby Snaky is pretty awful. It's actually one of the phobies that I hope they will rework or at least buff or something like that at some point. I think a rework would be better, otherwise it's just too good for like bad players. But my point here is, if we are comparing it to Baby Snaky and they are kind of around the same level, that looks pretty bad for Mozzy. So I don't think this is going to be a great phobie. Maybe you will use it sometimes when you really need a 3-key flyer, but then almost every time I would much rather just go for like Tooth Fairy or something like that instead, which has range, and that is a very big deal, obviously. So I don't really predict that Mozzy will be super good, but maybe we will see it played in some like niche scenario where you can have it fight something in the corner, because Mozzy pretty much needs to be like in a 1-against-1 against a phobie that cannot kill it in a single turn. So it needs to face something with like 400 or less attack, or 425 or less attack, I guess, just so that they can't two-hit it. Of course, I'm talking about level 1s here. Next up, we have the Sneer trio, or the Butlers, whatever you want to call them. They are pretty interesting because they have a stacking pairing bonus, and each of them get different effects from it. I think the thing about these three is that at no pairing they are all pretty damn terrible. At one pairing they are about on par with other phobies for the Alfred and Guillaume. Dolores is pretty bad at one pairing, and then at 3 pairing they're all really good, and Dolores is kind of insane. So if we just quickly have to go through them at like no pairing here, this is obviously just not a good phobie, right? But if we are talking about a 1 pairing, so that this becomes 550 attack, suddenly it's very comparable to Giggles, because I look at the like resurrect effect as effectively being like 300 to 400 health ish. So it's very comparable to Giggles at that point, I would say. So at 1 pairing, it's a pretty decent phobie. You can look at Guillaume the same way. At 1 pairing, it's essentially like a Cyclops, or like a different version of Hevo with a bit more attack and no lobbing, which is what Cyclops is. So it's very similar to Cyclops. Now Cyclops is the great phobie, but this is still decent, and I would say it's slightly better than Cyclops at 1 pairing. And then we have Dolores, which at 1 pairing is essentially like Bedside Manners level, and Bedside Manners is a 5-key, so it's pretty bad at 1 pairing. If we're then looking at 2 pairing, this becomes 750 attack, which is a pretty disgusting amount. That is a lot of attack power. It's enough to one-hit a Tickles. You can one-hit a lot of the smaller phobies like that, and you can 2-hit a lot of mid-range phobies also. So this is very strong at 2 pairing. For Guillaume, you just get very fast when you have 2 pairing, which is also great. That means it's very easy to maneuver around, and you will likely not end up losing this as the first one, because you can pretty much always escape or put yourself in positions where they won't be able to just kill it. It's going to also be very fast at supporting your other phobies. If you went for Dolores and Alfred first, then this will come out very quickly, because it will have 6 movement essentially, or be able to move 6 tiles on the first turn. Finally, we have Dolores, and this phobie gets really good when you have 3 pairing, because the difference between being 2 range and 3 range is incredibly big, just like the difference between being 1 range and 2 range is incredibly big. It basically makes it on par with Chuck when it has 3 range, which means it goes from being at 1 pairing it's essentially like a 5-key, to at 2 pairing it's essentially kind of like a 9-key. And that means that it is very important that you always keep these phobies alive, or at least keep them alive for a very long time when you are using them. Because if you end up losing one of them early, that like removes the potential of the other ones by a lot. Like if Alfred dies early on, then Guillaume is essentially a Cyclops, and this is a kind of overcosted Bedside Manners, and that is a pretty terrible thing to be playing. Obviously those aren't really superb phobies, but at double pairing all 3 of these phobies are very good, and Dolores is especially powerful. So the question is then, how easy is it to keep these phobies safe so that you don't end up losing them while still being aggressive with them, and obviously being able to fight and stuff like that, because that's what you are bringing phobies like this for. They have to be able to attack. they are made for combat essentially. They are not like combo pieces. They just fight really well, and when they are all together, they fight extremely well. I think that it's actually going to be fairly easy to keep them alive as long as you are able to keep Alfred alive well. Alfred is the most vulnerable one among them by a mile, because Dolores is, like, first of all, it's gonna have way more range most of the time, but it is also much tankier. And Guillaume is going to be super fast with his Sneer bonus, so he's going to be very hard to catch for the opponent, and you can easily maneuver him around so that you don't lose him. Alfred, on the other hand, is quite slow and not that high health, so this is most likely going to be what most of your opponents target if you're trying to play the Sneer trio. And I think you can actually keep Alfred alive fairly well, as long as you don't go like too frontline with him, and you just sit back and kind of let the other two phobies do a lot of the work, and you like... If an opponent gets close, obviously you're going to hit them, but most of the time you're going to be moving him once and then hitting the opponent. You're not going to be able to get double hits because Alfred is just going to die if you try and do that. And it's too important to keep him alive because he does so much for Dolores. Dolores essentially changes in terms of how much it's worth. When Alfred or Gian dies, this changes like 4 keys in value. So it's very, very, very important that you keep it alive. And I think it's gonna be possible to do so. I don't think these phobies are ones that you're just going to be spamming every game, because they are actually fairly slow. As you can already guess from just looking at them, all of them are one movement on the first turn. So what's probably going to be happening is that you will play these on large maps. You're going to go Alfred first, then you go Guillaume on the next turn to have a fast phobie that can support him, and then you go Dolores as the last one. Sometimes you may go Alfred into Dolores instead, but I think Alfred is probably going to be first most of the time, because he allows you to bank into Dolores very well. And he's also just not like very high commitment. Like if the opponent goes super hard on trying to kill the Alfred, you can always just like go out of the Sneers and not go for them anyway, and they will just have thrown themselves at you, and it will probably be good for you. So I think Alfred is going to be your first summoned one most of the time, and then you either follow it up with speed if you need it, or potential range for the next turn after that if you need that instead. And I think they're going to be pretty good. I just don't think you're going to be spamming them that much, because on maps where you can actually play fast, they are maybe too slow, because you are playing 2 fairly high cost turrets and 1 very fast phobie. So that kind of means that you have to already be on the board before you can go for these on a lot of maps. You're not gonna like summon Alfred turn 1, Guillaume turn 2, and then this turn 3 or anything. That you wouldn't have keys enough for that anyway, but you get what I mean. Unless you're going second, then I guess you could go Dolores, Guillaume, Alfred. I just don't think that's going to be a great opener. I think you're first going to go out with some 1 keys and maybe like a Jin Sting and hold the board, and then you start going for these, and they can be like your combat phobies, I guess you can call it. You just have to make sure that none of them die too early on, because then it's going to be pretty difficult. I'm very excited to see how they're going to do, of course. I think they're going to be pretty good. One last thing I want to say before I move on from these is I hate how they made Alfred an ultra rare. I think that if they are doing pairing phobies, they cannot be ultra rare phobies. It is going to feel so bad for a lot of players when they open Alfred and Dolores, or not Alfred, Guillaume and Dolores, and they do not own Alfred because he is an ultra rare. I think that is just straight up bad game design in my opinion. Like, there's no really other way to say it. There's no way around that. It's just bad game design. You could have made another phobia ultra rare, or just made this a rare instead, and it wouldn't really touch your profits, and it would be way better for most players. Like, it just feels terrible if you open these two and you don't have Alfred, because it feels like you drew blanks essentially, which is very sad, because just using Dolores and Guillaume is not good. Like that's essentially like a Cyclops and a overcosted Bad Manners. You're not gonna do that. You need Alfred to be part of the combo. Same thing if you open Alfred as like your first ultra rare and you don't have Dolores. That's also going to be feeling pretty bad, I would say. So I kind of hate how they did that. That's just like a bit of a note on the design which I don't like. Next up, we have Octo-Buddy. Octo-Buddy is a pretty interesting phobie. It allows you to pluck up pits for 3 turns. These are 3 of your own turns, I should say, so it doesn't just like disappear very fast. It actually lasts for a fairly long time. It is quite understated to have this ability. It's not that bad when you compare it to Cyclops, actually. It's like 250 less health, and you get a little bit of damage. But we're not going to compare it to Cyclops, we're going to compare it to Hevo. Then it's 500 less health for 70 more attack and no lobbing, which is a pretty high cost. We're comparing to Hevo, by the way, because Hevo is actually a good card, Cyclops is not. Even though Cyclops is probably closer to this. So I think you're paying a fairly high price for the plugging up a pit, but it's not so high that you can't afford it if it's actually good for you. If we just start looking at some maps, there are a few ones where it could be pretty good to cover up pits. So like you could maybe cover up this one and you can walk directly out here with another phobie. Next up you can start plucking up some of these for a couple turns, and that will make it way easier to sort of defend your heart. Stuff like that on this map. On Desolation Row you could maybe put one here, but I don't really think that makes any sense. It's just as fast to just walk around, so there's no real point in that. And on something like Norton Crosses you could use it to take this bottom point, but most of the time you fight over the top points, so that's not that relevant. And I kind of went through all of the maps with Abyss tiles on, and I don't really think there are any one where Octo-Buddy is going to be super insane or anything, or where it will like unlock super special strategies or anything for you. I do still think this is going to be somewhat situationally useful though. There could be like an opponent that just plays around putting you in a pit. If there's a map with just 1 pit or 2 pits, maybe you cover up one of them and their strategy kind of gets denied that way. You could also like use this for some kind of strategy where you maybe hard rush on a few maps and stuff like that. Overall though, I think it's going to be pretty niche, and Octo-Buddy just doesn't really have the stats to where you can just use it as a utility phobie. You have to actually have like a purpose with putting down the plug in the pit and being able to walk on it. Because if you're just using it for like capturing a point or something like that, that's not really quite worth it in my opinion. It's better to just like go for something else than that can capture the point naturally or break some blocks or whatever you can do. So overall I think this is going to be a pretty niche phobie from my first impressions. I think it could probably have slightly more health. So could Cyclops though, so both of them could maybe do with a slight buff, but we'll have to see first before we can make judgments on that. Then we have Preacher. Preacher I actually think is going to be pretty damn strong. Preacher is essentially just a like very big Innocuous, or kind of like a Oopsie Baby, but without the debuff of course, that you can move out way faster, but you have to spend some actions on and stuff like that. The very good thing about this phobie though is that you have 2 movement first, and then it becomes like a 3 range phobie that you of course cannot move in any way. But you can very quickly get on the board with that. So if we just look at like a random large map maybe. Let's just take, I don't even know. What's a good one to show it on? Maybe like on Magnificent here. If we're just running out with him and we put him here on the first turn, next turn we walk in here and we use the ability, so now he has 3 range, and we could do that on like turn 2 or 3 if we really want to. Now it's sitting here, it's denying abilities in this area here. It's able to reach both of these points. This point is also defended very much because you have like a huge damage zone and you have very high control over this middle part of the map. The opponent can essentially only sit like back here to be safe, which is very little space given to them. So you are very quickly getting onto the map with you're essentially like putting a Oopsie Baby in the middle of the map a turn or 2 faster than it should be able to, which can be a very big deal. Of course, I know it doesn't have the debuff and it has more attack power and stuff like that, but essentially you get to put like a 3 range Innocuous like phobie into the middle of the map, and on top of that you have the ability, like anti-ability zone, what's it called again? Ability dampening zone, which is also very good because that means your opponent cannot use a lot of stuff against this. They cannot Noxious it, they can't jump on with like a Cassowary, they can't use Creep. There's a whole lot of abilities that they cannot use while they are in this damage zone, which is very, 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 very good for Preacher. It means that you're not really going to get poisoned by any phobies with this, unless they go Russell, I guess. But no other phobies are really going to be poisoning this. And it's just like safe against a lot of things. You are of course going to build around this a little bit, so you won't have too many ability phobies that are gonna get cancelled by it, because it does also cancel your own phobies, of course. But you can kind of just go around that by not putting your own phobies in the area, or just not having too many ability phobies. So that's just going to be an upside most of the time. It is also completely immovable, kind of like how Boomer or Ruckus are. So you have like a very solid position once you get out there with it. Overall, I just think this phobia is going to be extremely good for like controlling space and getting onto the map like very early on to have a commanding position against the opponent. Another map where you could go very crazy with it is Desolation Row. You could put it right here on the first turn, and then next turn you could put it on the stem pad and use the ability. So then you're covering this entire space. Maybe you have to break the block for that to be super good, but it's still a large space you cover. You could even go aggressive with it also. Place it here on the first turn, next turn you go over here or something like that. You put down the ability dampening zone. They can't use abilities from the stim pad. You're covering this entire side of the map. It's like very, very rough to play against for how early it can get out there. And that goes for a lot of the large maps. Even for a small map, you can use it if you really want to. You can run it out here, and next turn you activate the ability and you can hit an opponent immediately. So that's pretty scary. And the ability dampening zone is of course also just very good. So I think Preacher is going to be a pretty strong phobia, as long as it's used correctly and you are in a situation where you can actually afford to walk out there and wait a turn before you use the ability, and the opponent can't just like all in you and then the Preacher dies or anything like that. This has to be played where the opponent cannot instantly kill it, but if you do that successfully, it puts the opponent in a very, very, very tough spot, because not only are they like in a spot where there's a 3-range phobia near their team that they have to back away from, they also can't even really go aggressive against it a lot of the time, because you will not be able to use abilities against it. It just shuts down so many meta phobies. Like Noxious doesn't get to use its ability, Hematic Ginsting doesn't get to. I know it's still gonna deal a decent bunch of damage, but there's just so many abilities in the game, also from Creep and Cassowary, Murderwing, so on, that this just cancels out. So I think this is going to be pretty damn good. Next up we have Pearl. Pearl I see as a side grade to Hevo 2.0 essentially. They are fairly similar in that they are both big mechanical phobies at 7 keys that are built around kind of pushing opponents either into lava, into abyss tiles, or into like bad positions, stuff like that, or doing like a poison combo where you Noxious them or bad sheep them and then you push them away. So that's kind of the idea with these kind of phobies, and I see these two as being fairly similar. I think Pearl is better if the opponent is spreading their phobies out a lot, because you can't really just spread out against this AoE. It's a different type of AoE from Hevo 2.0's. And then I also think it's going to be better on maps where Hevo 2.0 is in danger of being pushed like into abyss tiles, because if Hevo 2.0 gets pushed into an abyss tile, he dies. If Pearl gets pushed into an abyss tile, it does not care, because it's a flyer. And there are also some maps with abyss tiles where you can fly over them with Pearl to get onto the map faster. So I think this is a little bit better on some of the maps with abyss tiles compared to Hevo 2.0. And then it may also be better if the opponent is able to sort of spread out their phobies in a good way. That said, I still think it's slightly worse than Hevo 2.0 in general, just because this is a 2-range phobia with lobbing attacks, which is very, very, very good. So that kind of gives it a bit of an edge over Pearl. But if you are slightly worse than Hevo 2.0 or like a side grade to him, that already means that this phobia is pretty damn solid, because Hevo 2.0 is a very good phobia. So overall, I think this is a pretty damn good phobia. It's going to be fairly good when people get it like a decent amount of levels on it, because it also has fairly decent stats, all things considered, considering how good this ability is. And that's going to be pretty good for the game, I think, just to have like a different option that does a kind of similar thing. Finally, we have Buzzkill. Buzzkill I don't really predict to be super insane or anything. I think it definitely will have some usage, but it's not going to be super great. The reason why I'm saying this is, like, if we compare it to Mount Rushmore, they have basically the same amount of stats. They're both 1700 health, 2 range, 2 movement, 400 attack. But Mount Rushmore gets lobbing attacks, and it doesn't have a lock on the ability. Now, the big advantage of Buzzkill is, of course, that the ability is lobbing. That's kind of what you're paying a full extra key for. But I don't really think that's worth it, to be honest. I think there are some cases where being able to lob with the block can be very good. It makes it way easier to like trap enemy phobies or block them in certain ways. But it's also just like, is that worth a full key more than Mount Rushmore? And most of the time I'd still rather use Gravedigger than Mount Rushmore. So I don't really think that's worth it. For me, the big thing is that this has a lock on the ability, compared to the like Mount Rushmore and Gravedigger, which do not have locks on their ability. So that makes Buzzkill a lot worse for me. And then there's also the fact that it doesn't have lobbing compared to Mount Rushmore, which has lobbing. And lobbing works really well with Terraform, because you can create a block and then you can stand behind it and like force the opponent to back off because they would be hit by lobbing attacks. So not having that is pretty bad. I still don't think this is a bad phobia at all though, because terraforming is just very, very, very good. It's one of the strongest abilities in the game, and this gives you some creative plays you can do where you lob over either obstacles or something like that, and you put blocks down to force the opponent into weird positions, or you can block fit like enemy phobies in if there are certain like for example on something like Phobopolis, they can't run away that well. That's not really a map that I think this is going to be great on, but just as an example, if you have very limited space due to either other obstacles or abyss tiles, then it can be pretty good for like blocking phobies in. You could, for example, also use it on something like the rings, where like the opponent maybe has a phobie sitting in here to take a point, then you put a block here and they're just completely trapped or something like that. Just as an example, you're probably never going to use it on this map, but what I'm saying is just that you can maybe block some enemy phobies into weird areas with it and sort of kill them for free that way, and that will be pretty good. Outside of that though, I think he's going to be generally speaking worse than something like just going Gravedigger, because Gravedigger is just so damn good. So overall, I'm not super excited for this phobia, but I do still think you can do some cool plays with it. It's also way easier to set up like AoE combos with this compared to Gravedigger, but I don't really think it's worth going him for those AoE combos, because he's 7 keys. That's a lot of keys to put in there instead of just like having Gravedigger and sacrificing it for the combo. I think that's just a better way of doing it. So maybe you can use him in some kind of like maybe Noxious or Hero 3.0 combo, but most of the time I don't think you're gonna be doing that. That was pretty much all of the new phobies. If we're just gonna go through them very quickly, Lenny I think is going to be pretty damn good. Mozzy I don't see being great. I think this is a little bit understated. I think the Sneer trio is going to be pretty good, or the Butlers. I think they will be pretty good, but I don't really love that this is an ultra rare, because most people aren't going to like have access to it, and they'll get these and be pretty sad about that. I do think they are fairly slow though, so you're not gonna just like overrun the opponent with them. Octo-Buddy I think is going to be pretty damn niche. Maybe there will be some maps in the future where Octo-Buddy is very, very strong on. That is something I could see happening. There could also just be some creative plays or some ways where you shut down certain playstyles where this will be very good. Overall, I think it's a bit too situational though, so I don't see this being like a general use phobia. Then we have Preacher. I think Preacher is just straight up great. I think it works well against a lot of the meta stuff. I think it's just great to get a turret out there, or not a turret, but like a, what do we even call it when it's 3 range? Like a big Inoculus like phobia, out there in the middle, a 3-range phobie in the middle of the map very, very quickly because it having 2 movement. So I think this is just going to be great. Pearl, I think, is going to be pretty good. It's just going to be a little bit worse than Hevo 2.0, but Hevo 2.0 is super good, and this will situationally be better than Hevo 2.0. So overall, a great phobie. And then finally, Buzzkill, I'm not super excited for. I think it looks super cool, but I just don't think it's like quite good enough when you compare it to Hevo, or not Hevo, Mount Crushmore. Mount Crushmore has essentially the same stats for a key less, and all you're losing is a bit of range on this, and you're getting a lob attack and not having this locked and stuff. So overall, I don't think that's going to be super good or anything. I'm still very excited for the new phobies. Of course, I'm going to be doing a big pack opening right after the patch goes live and I get my content affiliate or creator affiliate coffee. But until then, I will just kind of wait, and we will see if I get any of the new ones. Hopefully I get some of them. I'm really hoping that I will get Alfred, because I think playing with that trio of the Butlers would be very fun. But that was everything I had for this one. If you think I missed anything, or if you have different opinions on some of the phobies or anything, feel free to leave a comment and we can kind of discuss it. It would be interesting to also hear other people's perspectives. So that's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.